I never thought that retiring to the California coast would come with so much baggage. I had spent decades working as a high school science teacher, saving every dime so that my wife Linda and I could finally buy our dream property. And we did an old cliffside home, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't the fanciest house, but it was ours. We loved the salty breeze, the sound of waves crashing below, and the quiet solitude that came with living at the edge of the world. But of course, the dream came with an HOA. At first I thought they'd be a minor nuisance, occasional fees. Newsletters about landscaping rules, maybe a meeting once a month. I couldn't have been more wrong. This HOA wasn't just picky about lawn heights or mailbox colors. They were ambitious. Too ambitious. It started when Linda overheard the HOA president chatting loudly at a board meeting. "We've got the most beautiful cliffside community on the West Coast," she boasted. "But you know what we're missing? A community spa. Imagine it an infinity-edged pool with a spa overlooking the ocean. A selling point for new buyers. Jewel of our neighborhood." Everyone clapped and cheered like she was promising free money. I raised my hand. Excuse me, where exactly are you planning to build this spa?" Marcia's smile was thin. "Oh, don't worry, Mr. Collins. We've scoped out the cliff behind your property. It's unused land, and we think it's the perfect spot. Of course, we'll send in contractors to stabilize it." I felt my stomach drop. That cliff wasn't just unused land. It was fragile, prone to erosion, and dangerously unstable. I knew because I'd spent years teaching geology. Earthquakes were a fact of life in California. Putting a massive concrete structure on a crumbly cliffside was like putting a piano on a rotten floorboard. I stood up. "That's insane. You can't just pour tons of concrete on a cliff that already has fault lines running through it. One good quake, and that thing will collapse into the ocean?" Marcia's eyes narrowed. "We'll take it under advisement. But the board has already voted, and the majority wants this spa. You'll just have to live with it." Asterisk, within a few weeks, construction trucks started rolling in. Cement mixers, bulldozers, contractors with clipboards. It looked like a commercial site, not a residential neighborhood. They pounded rebar into the ground, poured concrete, and installed flashy blue tiles. All the while, Linda and I sat on our porch, watching the cliff we loved turn into a science experiment gone wrong. One afternoon, I walked down to the site, hard hat or not, and confronted the lead contractor. "Do you realize the soil you're working on isn't stable? This is basically compacted sand mixed with fractured rock. You can't anchor a spa here." The guy shrugged. "Hey, not my problem." "The HOA paid for permits?" I blinked. "Permits? From who?" He didn't answer, just walked away. That told me everything I needed to know. Linda squeezed my hand that evening. "They didn't get city approval, did they?" I shook my head. Not a chance. No real engineer would sign off on this. They're cutting corners, hoping no one notices until it's too late. Asterisk, some of our neighbors loved the project. They were already bragging about spa parties, sunset yoga sessions, and selling their homes for double what they were worth. At 2:14 in the morning, the ground began to tremble. At first I thought it was one of those small tremors California gets all the time, just a quick jolt and done. But this one didn't stop. The walls rattled, dishes clattered from the cabinets, and Linda grabbed onto my arm. "David," she cried, "I've got you." I shouted, pulling her under the sturdy oak table we'd kept for moments just like this. The earthquake roared like a freight train. The whole house swayed, the floor heaving beneath us. I heard glass shattering, books toppling, and then something else. A deep, guttural rumble, like the sound of thunder rolling inside the earth itself. The cliff was giving way. Asterisk. We ran outside as soon as the shaking eased. From our yard, I could see at the spa, the crown jewel of Marcia's HOA empire. The concrete deck had cracked clean down the middle, the tiles buckled like a broken spine. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes as water poured out like a waterfall, carrying chunks of concrete with it. Then, with a deafening roar, the entire spa slid off the cliff. It crashed against the rocks below, sending up a spray of water, dust, and debris. The sound was like the world splitting in half. My knees buckled as I watched it vanish into the Pacific. Linda clutched her chest. Oh my God. It's gone. All of it. I wrapped an arm around her, but inside, my heart was pounding for another reason. Not really fear. Because the cracks in our own house were spreading, and I knew this wasn't over. Asterisk by dawn, the neighborhood was in chaos. Neighbors stood in the street in their pajamas, whispering and pointing at the cliff. Some cried. Others yelled. A few just stared in stunned silence. Marcia was there too, barking orders into her phone. Her blonde hair was a mess, and her designer robe was stained with dirt. But she still had that same arrogance in her eyes. Get me the insurance adjuster, she snapped. No, I don't care what time it is. I said, get them out here today. When she saw me, her face twisted into a glare. You, she hissed, marching over in her slippers. This is your fault. I blinked. My fault? You built an illegal spa on a crumbling cliff? I warned you this would happen. You undermined the board. She screamed. You scared the neighbors. You spread lies, and you stop. I barked. My patience gone. You gambled with people's safety, Marcia. You ignored permits, ignored experts, and now look what's happened. She jabbed a finger at me. Don't get too comfortable, Mr. Collins. You'll be hearing from our lawyer. Asterisk that day was a blur of sirens and official vehicles. The fire department showed up, then the police, and eventually a city engineer. They roped off the area near the cliff and told everyone to stay clear. The engineer, gray-haired man with a clipboard, shook his head as he looked at the wreckage. Whoever authorized this project should have been out of their minds. This cliff was never stable enough to handle that kind of load. I almost laughed at the bitter irony. That's exactly what I told them. Linda touched my arm. At least it's over now. Maybe this will make them stop, but I wasn't so sure. HOS rarely admit fault. Asterisk, 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. Thick envelope. Expensive stationery. Bold words across the top. Notice of legal action. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I opened it. David? Linda whispered. What is it? I read the first paragraph out loud, my voice flat. The HOA is filing a lawsuit against me for damages resulting from the collapse of the spa. They claim my property destabilized the cliff and caused the structure to fall. Linda gasped. They're blaming you? I nodded slowly, fury rising in my chest. They build an illegal spa. Ignore every warning, and when it collapses, they point the finger at the one guy who told the truth. The first court date came faster than I expected. One moment I was compiling photos of the cliff, geological maps, and city codes. The next, I was standing inside a wood-paneled courtroom with my stomach in knots. The HOA had hired a sharp-dressed lawyer, the kind who smiled like a shark every time he spoke. He stood tall, adjusting his tie, while Marcia sat smugly behind him with her board members. Whispering and smirking like they were at a country club brunch, Linda sat beside me, her hand warm on mine. You can do this, David. Just tell the truth. And that's exactly what I intended to do. The lawyer strutted up first. Your Honor, he began smoothly, this case is simple. My clients invested in a community project designed to enrich the neighborhood. But due to the negligence of Mr. Collins, he jabbed a finger in my direction. The cliff beneath his property was improperly maintained. His refusal to cooperate with the HOA's safety guidelines directly led to the collapse of the spa, causing catastrophic damage and financial loss. A murmur ran through the small crowd in the courtroom. I wanted to jump up and shout, but my attorney, a calm, gray-bearded man named Thomas, placed a firm hand on my arm. Patience, he whispered. When it was our turn, Thomas rose slowly, clearing his throat. Your Honor, the story is not nearly as neat as the HOA would like you to believe. The truth is that the spa was built without city permits, on unstable land. Against the advice of multiple warnings, including those from my client, a retired science teacher who has spent decades studying geology, the HOA knowingly endangered not only property but lives, And now, rather than accept responsibility, they are trying to pin their reckless actions on the one man who stood up to them. The judge leaned back, stroking his chin. "Do you have evidence?" Thomas smiled faintly. "Plenty. I was called to the stand." My palms were sweaty, but once I started talking, my teacher's voice came out strong and steady. I told the board months before construction that the cliff was unstable. I pointed out cracks in the soil, shifts in the retaining walls. I even brought in old geological survey maps showing fault lines running directly through this property. I held up photos. I'd taken cracks in the concrete before the collapse, water leaking down the cliff face, even neighbors pointing nervously at shifting soil. The HOA lawyer tried to interrupt. "Objection. Speculation." The judge waved it off. "Overruled. Continue." I leaned forward. This wasn't speculation. It was fact. And when the earthquake hit, nature proved me right. That spa was doomed from the moment they poured the first bucket of concrete. The real turning
Point came when Thomas presented city records.
He pulled out a binder and laid it on the table. "These are permit records from the city planning office," he explained. "Nowhere in these documents is there approval for the construction of a cliffside spa. In fact, there's a letter of denial dated 6 months before construction even began." The courtroom went silent. The judge raised an eyebrow. "So you're telling me this structure was built illegally?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And the HOA not only knew this, they concealed it from homeowners." Marcia shifted in her seat, her face pale for the first time. But the final blow came from an unexpected ally. Jim, my neighbor, who had once whispered his fears to me late at night, stood up from the back row. "Your Honor," he said, his voice shaking. I was on the HOA board when this project was approved. We were told by Marcia that the city had signed off. When I asked to see the paperwork, she told me it wasn't my concern. I regret staying quiet then. But I can't sit by while they destroy David for telling the truth." The judge stared at Marcia. "Is this true?" Marcia fumbled with her papers, her lips tightening into a thin line. "That's irrelevant. The point is, no," the judge cut her off. "The point is, you authorized an illegal build that endangered this community. And now you're blaming a man who warned you. That will not stand." As we left the courtroom that day, Linda squeezed my hand so tightly, I thought she'd never let go. "You did it," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "You showed them." I smiled, though exhaustion weighed on me. "It's not over yet, but we've cracked their armor. Now it's just a matter of finishing the fight." Marcia stormed past us on her way out, her lawyer trailing behind. She shot me a look that could curdle milk. "This isn't finished, Collins," she hissed. I met her glare head-on. "You're right. It isn't. But the difference is, I've got the truth on my side. What do you have?" Her silence was the sweetest sound I'd heard all day. That night, our neighbors gathered outside our home. Some brought food, others just came with words of encouragement. Jim even hugged me, something I never thought I'd see from the quiet man next door. "For years," he admitted. "We've all been afraid of the HOA, afraid of fines, retaliation, humiliation. But you stood up to them, David. You reminded us we're not powerless." Linda smiled proudly, her arm linked with mine. "They can't bully us anymore. Not after this." I looked out at the group of tired, frustrated homeowners and felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about a spa anymore. It was about every overreach, every unjust fine, every heavy-handed rule that had chipped away at people's peace. The fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. The final hearing drew a bigger crowd than anyone expected. Word had spread throughout the community, and even beyond that, our HOA had built an illegal spa, lied about permits, and then tried to pin the blame on me when disaster struck. Homeowners who had been silent for years now filled the courtroom pews, whispering among themselves, their eyes burning holes into Marcia and her board. I sat beside my attorney, Thomas, trying to keep calm. Linda squeezed my hand, her quiet strength anchoring me. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. He shuffled his papers, then fixed his gaze on Marcia and the HOA lawyer. Asterisk. This case has revealed not only negligence, but willful deception, he said sternly. The Homeowners Association approved and financed the construction of a cliffside spa without proper permits. They ignored safety warnings and concealed crucial information from both the city and their own residents. And when their reckless project collapsed during a natural disaster, they attempted to shift responsibility onto an innocent homeowner. Marcia's lawyer stood. Your Honor, with all due respect, the judge held up a hand. Silence. The evidence is overwhelming. This court finds the HOA's claims against Mr. Collins baseless and dismisses them in their entirety. A cheer rippled through the courtroom. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, but the judge wasn't done. He turned to Marcia directly. Furthermore, this court recommends a full investigation into the HOA's financial practices and the conduct of its board members. The misuse of community funds and the endangerment of public safety will not be tolerated. Marcia's face went white. Asterisk. Within weeks, the consequences came crashing down not on me, but on them. The city launched an investigation. Inspectors poured through the HOA's records, uncovering a web of shady deals. Kickbacks from contractors, falsified documents, even funds siphoned into private accounts. Marcia was forced to resign, her once iron grip on the community shattered. Several board members followed, either out of guilt or fear of prosecution. Insurance companies refused to cover the spa disaster, labeling it an unauthorized structure that left the HOA drowning in debt. With angry homeowners demanding answers, and for the first time in years, I could walk through my neighborhood without feeling the weight of their intimidation. People waved, smiled, even stopped to thank me. David, one elderly neighbor said, tears in her eyes, you saved us. We thought we'd lost our homes, our voices, but you gave them back. Asterisk. One evening, Linda and I walked to the edge of the cliff where the spa had once stood. The ground was scarred, chunks of broken concrete still embedded in the dirt. But beyond the wreckage, the Pacific stretched wide and endless. The sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold. Linda slipped her arm around me. Hard to believe they tried to turn this into a resort. I chuckled softly. Nature had other plans. She looked up at me, her eyes warm. You didn't just fight for us. You fought for everyone. You turned the tide. I took a deep breath, the ocean breeze filling my lungs. For months, I had lived with anger, fear, and uncertainty. Now, standing there with the woman I loved, all I felt was peace. They wanted to build a monument to greed, I said quietly. But all they built was their own downfall. Asterisk. In the months that followed, the HOA was restructured. Honest, hard-working neighbors stepped up to take over leadership. Rules became fair again. Meetings turned from shouting matches into genuine discussions. The neighborhood, once divided and fearful, slowly began to heal. Jim, my quiet neighbor, joined the new board. At the first meeting, he looked at me across the room and said, "We owe you more than thanks. David, you reminded us that one voice can stand against corruption." I smiled, shaking my head. All I did was tell the truth. It's the rest of you who made it count. Asterisk. Looking back, I realized the earthquake didn't just bring down a spit, shook loose the rot that had been festering in our community for years. It forced us to see the truth, no matter how messy or painful. The HOA tried to crush me with lies, but instead, they exposed themselves. And as for me, I learned that sometimes standing firm on shaky ground is exactly what it takes to make a foundation strong again. As the waves crashed below that evening, I whispered to myself, justice.